Compared to where we've been over the course of the season in circuits like this, I think that's a good result for us. How much did the incidents on Friday affect the rest of the weekend? Well, when you crash two cars, it's always going to make for a very difficult weekend from then onwards. We've done quite a lot of damage to the cars, so we've broken both floors, we've broken both rear wings, we've damaged quite a lot of suspension, and on Lewis's car we'd also damaged the front wing and done some cosmetic damage to the chassis, so damage that we can repair but not repair over a weekend. That meant completely rebuilding Lewis's car from scratch, and it meant also trying to build one floor out of two. We had one complete spare we could fit, and we had to get the best out of the two crash floors to build another. And it also meant we were compromised on George's rear wing, because we only had one complete spare rear wing that we chose to fit to Lewis's car because he was going to have to come through the field, which meant that George had to fit a rear wing, which is probably not the ideal level of downforce. It was a bit too much downforce for that circuit. Having rebuilt the cars, you've also got to sort of dial in the setup again, and you've got very limited time in FP2 to do that, and that was always going to be another compromise. And then finally, having damaged two cars as badly as we did on Friday, the drivers are now in a position where if we damage them in the sprint race, we may well be in a position where we couldn't race on Sunday. So all of that has to be factored in, and all of that sort of compromises your weekend. Was it difficult to fix both cars in time for FP2? Well, I think you probably saw we managed to get George out about 5 minutes into FP2, and with Lewis we were out sort of about halfway through the session. There's a huge amount of work went into getting those cars ready, and in Lewis's case he'd done so much damage to the chassis, actually only cosmetic damage, but damage that we couldn't fix in the field. We had to sort of build his car from scratch on Saturday morning. A number of years ago we used to be allowed to have a T-car, so a complete third car built in the garage, but the rules were changed so that you could only have your two race cars and you could carry just a spare tub or a spare chassis. So that's the bit the driver sits in with the fuel tank on the back of it. And so that car had to be built from nothing. So fitting the engine, the gearbox, all the suspension, all of the sort of car systems that bolt around the chassis, all had to be put in place. And the mechanics managed to do that in 3.5 hours on Saturday morning, which is an amazing achievement. And all credit to them for actually getting us back out and into FP2. And the advantage of getting out into FP2 was that we could actually make sure that the setup on Lewis's car was right, that the balance was right, and he was happy with the car in time for sprint qualifying. How was the race pace compared to expectation? Well, I think you guys will have been watching all the races and you'll have seen that generally we've gone better in the races than we've gone in qualifying. Having qualified pretty well, at least shown good pace in qualifying before the crashes, then we were hoping for really good pace in the races. I think what we saw on Sunday was encouraging for us. I think on a circuit that hasn't really played to our strengths in the past, to be where we were within 2 or 3 tenths of the front was actually decent compared to what we've seen recently. I think for George to come right through the field, having had the accident at the beginning, again was encouraging for us going forward. And so overall pretty happy with that. Did George have any damage other than that to the front wing? Well, as you'll have seen, there was contact in the first lap between George and Perez, and that damaged the front wing end plate on George's car. And while that might not seem like a big effect, not only affects the total downforce of the car, but more importantly, it affects the balance. That causes a loss of lap time, but it also causes a change in the way the tyres degrade. Because you're sliding on the front tyres, you degrade the front tyres faster. And early in the race, it quickly became apparent that George didn't have the pace we would have expected from him. So what we decided to do was to make that first pit stop early, and in the pit stop to change the front wing, and that's what we did. And from that point on, George's pace was pretty encouraging, and obviously to drive from where he was pretty much at the back of the field all the way back to 4th place was a good result. How was Lewis's overall pace through the weekend? Well, as always, we've got 2 fantastic drivers, and Lewis is always going to bring home the best result we can get from the car. I think, as you saw on Friday, we were encouraged by the pace we had. I think in qualifying, we were going through the various qualifying sessions thinking, you know, we had a strong chance of getting ourselves on that front row of the grid. A position we haven't found ourselves in recent races, and possibly why we ended up with 2 accidents with both cars, in that the driver was just trying to find that extra little bit in the car, trying to get ourselves onto that front row of the grid, the potential pace we believe we had in that car. I think in the sprint session, it was really difficult for Lewis to show the pace he had. I mean, once you're in the traffic, when you're in those DRS trains, where there's multiple cars in front of you, all within DRS, it's very difficult to pass and show the pace of the car. In the main race on Sunday, Lewis was able to get through the slower cars that were in front of him, get himself up into a position where he only had the Red Bulls and the Ferraris ahead. And while we finished the race quite a chunk off the front, some of that was because the Ferraris and the Red Bull were able to stop under that VSC at the end and stop onto the medium tyre and effectively get a cheap stop. If you correct the pace for degradation, we think we were probably 2, maybe 3 tenths behind the Ferrari, which was the quickest car in the race this weekend. While that's not where we aim to be, you know, we want to be fighting at the front. We want to be the quickest car if we possibly can be. Compared to where we've been over the course of the season in circuits like this, I think that's a good result for us, and it shows that the bits we're bringing to the car, we're starting to make the step forward we want to make, and hopefully we can keep making those steps forward and get ourselves into a position where we can compete at the front in every race. Why wasn't Lewis able to get closer to the front running cars after the second stop onto the medium? So at that stage of the race was about 7 laps prior to the VSC that occurred because of Sainz's breakdown in the Ferrari. So we'd already taken our second stop, we were on the medium. Leclerc and Verstappen out front were on the hard tyre. So when the VSC came out, they would have been thinking if there was a full safety car, restarting the tyres on the hard was going to be difficult. So for them it made perfect sense to stop again and stop onto the medium, make use of that cheap stop. If it turned into a full safety car, they'd be able to turn the tyres back on. For us, we were already on the right tyre. We were already on the medium tyre. And so our issue was, what do we do from there? And if we'd have pitted, potentially what would have happened if we'd have come out behind slower cars, we'd have dropped back into traffic. And at that point, we were taking a risk. So the real simple sort of balance we were trying to strike is, would we have had an opportunity if we'd have made that extra stop? And if not, were we taking a risk by pitting into traffic? And so at that point, the sensible solution was just to stay on the tyres we were on. And so as a consequence of that, we were on 7-lap older tyres than the cars in front, and so we were never going to be able to close them down. Both from the point of view we were on an older tyre and also from the point of view they were a slightly quicker car at that stage of the race. Thank you for all your questions. As always, it's really enlightening to see the questions that you're asking. And we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time after the French Grand Prix.